Hi, folks. Thanks for being with us for today's Safety and Health webcast sponsored by JJ Keller. We're going to give our audience just a moment to get settled in today before we start the presentation. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. Thank you. Folks, we thank you again for joining us today. We'll start the presentation in about 30 seconds. We'll just give everyone a little bit more time to get settled in before we begin. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast, The Human Side of Safety, Overcome Objections and Address Motivations to Increase Participation, sponsored by JJ Keller. My name is Barry Botino, and I'm an associate editor at Safety and Health. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's event. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to share with everyone. As a disclaimer, the views of today's speakers and organization are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the council or the magazine endorses those items. After today's presentation, we'll conduct a Q&A with our speakers. If you have a question, just click on the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen, type in your question, and press the send button. You don't have to wait for the Q&A to begin to send in your question. We welcome those questions at any time during today's event. After this presentation, you'll also be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, but I'll tell you more about that a little later. Finally, this webcast will be archived. If you want to view this presentation or any of our past webcasts, please go to safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's introduce our presenters. With us today are Ed Zaleski and Holly Pups. Ed is a senior editor at JJ Keller who researches and creates content on a wide variety of safety-related topics and contributes to several of the company's products. He specializes in issues including injury and illness record keeping, walking working surfaces, and powered industrial trucks. Holly joined JJ Keller in 2021 as an EHS editor specializing in workplace safety. She is a former OSHA compliance officer who has more than a decade of industrial safety experience. Holly has worked in pharmaceuticals, plastics manufacturing, and also in the public sector. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation today. And Ed, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us. Today's webcast is sponsored by the JJ Keller Safety Management Suite. This is a solution that works as hard as you do. The Safety Management Suite streamlines compliance at every level of your business. It makes it easy to develop, implement, and maintain an industry-specific safety program. And because your safety is our priority, today's attendees will be offered complimentary access to our compliance tools and resources in Safety Management Suite. So on behalf of JJ Keller Safety Management Suite, we welcome you. All right, let's talk a little bit about psychology here. You know, getting support for safety in the workplace often requires a bit of psychology. We need to understand employee motivations as well as their objections in order to get their support. And frankly, this is key to improving your safety culture. By that, I mean, we need to not only understand what motivates employees to follow the rules, but understand why some of them choose not to follow the rules. Actually, in 2021, JJ Keller surveyed safety professionals, and we asked for reasons that employees gave for not wearing personal protective equipment. Well, the top two reasons were I just didn't want to wear it, and I didn't think it was necessary. Well, this is telling me that employees think they can choose to accept the risk of not wearing PPE. Well, they don't have the authority to make that choice. And frankly, they probably don't have the information needed to make an informed choice on the risk. So what is motivating that decision? That's the kind of thing we want to talk about today. A common challenge, of course, is how do we get employees more involved in safety? Well, there's no easy answer, but I suggest that one approach is to make them want to participate. So, in other words, instead of thinking, how do I get people to participate more? Think about how you can make them want to participate more. In other words, what would make them choose to participate more? Among other things we're going to discuss is telling them how to participate. If you want them to take a more active role, then you need to give them action items. I mean, the other thing is to tell them why safety matters and specifically why it matters to them. I mean, the employees are the ones who suffer the most if they get hurt, right? So this also tells them why they should participate. And finally, some of you may have had this, that getting workers to support safety sometimes feels like a confrontation. Well, they should have the goal of going home safe every day. And that's also your goal. So if you can show them we all have the same objective here, it might help you work together and overcome some of that confrontational attitude. We're going to cover a lot of that. So here's what we'll be talking about as we go throughout the presentation. Uh, to get workers more involved, again, you want to tell them how to participate, and that means giving them action items. So we're going to offer some tips on that. We also get a lot of questions on dealing with complacency, so we'll offer some pointers there. And I think part of the problem is that employees who never had a bad experience, never got injured, they might underestimate the risk because it's all hypothetical or theoretical. It doesn't seem real. So we'll talk about that. Now, at the other side of that, you may have employees who did get hurt or had a frightening near miss. And if you can get them to share their stories, they can be powerful advocates for safety. That also, those peer stories helps you overcome bad attitudes and resistance. So that's something we'll cover as well. And then near the end, we're going to look at the program, some of the problems with supervisor support, and maybe give you some ideas for talking to upper management about why supervisors need to face consequences if they're failing to enforce safety. So I'm going to start out here with a poll question. We'll have that launched. We want to know, how often does your job involve dealing with motivation issues or safety objections? And this could be from regular workers, could be objections from supervisors, maybe even objections for upper management. So how often do you deal with this? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Maybe just a couple times a month, maybe only once a month. And then we're giving you the option of less than monthly. So please enter your results in the poll. And while you do that, I want to set a little bit more foundation for today's event. I mentioned that employees have motives for their behaviors, whether they're following or ignoring safety rules. But addressing the motives is very different from addressing the behaviors. So as an example, you might have heard someone has an attitude problem, maybe needs an attitude adjustment, something I've heard in the workplace. Well, the attitude is the behavior. If you want to change the attitude, you need to identify and address the motive for that behavior. There's an underlying cause. Otherwise, you're addressing the symptom, not the cause. So telling an employee to change their attitude probably isn't going to be any more effective than telling your teenager to change their attitude. So that is something we're going to address today too. Now, hopefully you've had a chance to answer the poll, and we're going to take a look at the results. About a third of you, 29%, deal with this daily. Oh, another third, 34, weekly. Honestly, the fact that only 11% of you deal with this less than once a month and 6% once a month, that's 17% are monthly or less. Everybody else is dealing as, so we like to show these results because we understand, look, you're all in the same boat, right? Over half of you are dealing with this on a daily or weekly basis. I know it's a challenge, so you're not alone, and hopefully that's why you showed up today. And with that, I want to turn things over to Holly to talk about getting us started on the motives.
Well, thank you so much, Ed. So a lot of what we'll cover is letting employees know that safety is not just about compliance or safety or about saving money, but safety is actually about them. You put a lot of effort into making sure that your employees get to go home without injuries. You might hear employees say something like, "This company only cares about money." Well, every employer obviously has to consider the bottom line if they want to stay in business. But while the company might pay the cost of the injuries, the workers pay the price, and you don't want them getting hurt. Let your employees know that we do this for you. You have to show them how safety benefits them, not just the company's bottom line. You might even point out that the more they push back, the more the company has to spend and reduce profits trying to protect them. So let's talk about how we can get employees more involved by helping you identify hazards. In one sense, we can look at the hazard assessments as asking, well, what if type questions. We evaluate what could go wrong and how injuries could happen. The goal is to prevent those what if situations from becoming what happened accident investigations. So getting employees involved in hazard assessments may help them understand why you have safety rules and procedures. Taking some workers along on your walkarounds or your self audits can help them understand the kind of hazards you're looking for and the kind of hazards that you actually do find. This allows you to show employees why safety matters, and it should help them make a more personal connection. For example, if you see a blocked fire exit, you can point out why it's a violation and how it can cost lives during an emergency. This helps make safety real by giving them actual real world situations so that safety is not just hypothetical. Another option is giving employees more to-do items. Safety rules often contain a lot of do not do this, do not do that, but it does not tell employees how they can actually participate. It's kind of like telling people don't get hurt, which doesn't really help anybody. You can increase their to-do list by changing how you deliver this information. For example, instead of saying, do not block the exit, you might say, if you see something blocking the exit, remove it and report it. This gives them an action item, a way for them to participate. As a good example, you've probably got signs that say safety glasses are required or something like that. You might even have signs on stairways that say use the handrail, and those are great examples. But if you want employees to participate more, you have to tell them how to participate by giving them specific action items. So change those do not items into to do items. And with that, I'll hand it back to Ed.
Thank you, Holly. Another common problem we get asked about is how to deal with complacency. And unfortunately, there's no simple answer to this. For today, I'm defining complacency as that, well, nothing bad's going to happen kind of attitude. Well, one of the better options we've come up with is to make that risk seem real. Now, if you or you know someone, a company that ever had a serious injury or a fatality, you know that suddenly everyone understands why safety is critical. Unfortunately, it's too late to help the worker who suffered. But things got real very quickly. Well, you can point out you don't want this to happen. Now, you might acknowledge, look, you haven't had anything happen, and if you're very careful, you can probably work safely without getting hurt, even if you're not following the rules all the time. But the thing is, things can happen. Equipment can fail unexpectedly. People can get distracted. It's difficult to be cautious every day, 40 hours a week for years. Every worker who ever got injured actually thought nothing bad was going to happen. So tell them you don't want that what if situation to become a what happened situation where you have to investigate the accident. Now, one way to address complacency or bring it up to your people is perhaps to use distracted driving. Most likely, some of your employees have checked their phone or adjusted the radio or maybe eating that takeout food while driving, and they suddenly realize they drifted out of their lane. Well, since they didn't cause an accident, they do it again a few days or weeks later. Now ask them how they feel when other drivers do that and a car drifts into their lane. Well, most likely they feel angry that someone else nearly caused an accident. So you can point out how complacency in others could put them at risk too. And then you can follow up and say, look, why would you engage in behaviors that you don't find acceptable when other people do it? It's a rhetorical question. They don't have to answer that. The point is that doing something that you know is unsafe just by claiming, well, nothing bad happened, that's not okay. I mean, hey, those other drivers didn't cause an accident, so nothing bad happened, right? But it's not acceptable. Another idea for dealing with employees who ignore the rules or are complacent about it, these are suggestions we got from safety professionals like you. One of our customers suggested having them write a letter to their family, describing what they'd say if they were hospitalized or if they were killed on the job. Now, this person worked in construction, and he said these tough, tattooed guys who would work at heights without fall protection or whatever, he'd have them write a letter to their family. They would come out of the job trailer in tears after writing. It helped them understand that when they take risks on the job, they aren't the only ones who pay the price, who suffer the consequences. And hey, people are on the clock. You can pay them to write a letter just as easily as you can pay them to be doing other tasks. Another person we talked to said they had everyone bring in a family photo and they put a caption on it saying, "This is why you stay safe." Well, it's great for people with kids. Your employees don't want to see their kids getting hurt. They're probably very protective. That family photo provides a reminder their kids don't want mom or dad to get hurt either. And that has made people stop and think. These don't cost anything either. Another customer asked his workers, younger ones especially, would you be willing to lose an arm for $100,000 or whatever workers' comp pays out? And of course, no, they wouldn't. Well, would you be willing to lose a couple of fingers for one extra hour of your pay? He said, well, no, obviously not. So finally, he described the kind of injuries that could result from taking shortcuts. You're not wearing your safety glasses, you lose an eye. Is it worth it? Is what the moments you're saving there, trying to save time, is that worth the risk of the injury? And I thought that was a clever way to put things in perspective. Often people take shortcuts because they're trying to get work done faster, but this helps demonstrate that they aren't doing the company or themselves any favors by taking those shortcuts and risks. And back to Holly for that.
So thanks again. So another option might be to have a safety meeting where you have some employees wear an eye patch to simulate an injury or tape some fingers together to show what it would be like to have a broken bone or an amputation. Now, you don't want people actually trying to do their jobs with these restrictions because that could be dangerous. But during a safety meeting, it might help drive home the impacts of these injuries. In fact, consider serving snacks to employees so they can see just how frustrating it is to perform simple tasks with a hand injury. Ask your employees if they would be willing to spend weeks, months, or even the rest of their lives with those limitations. Then ask if taking a risk, however small it may be, is worth the potential consequences. This could be a good approach with younger workers who, in my experience, have said that they're invincible, but the purpose is to make things real and not just hypothetical. A common thread in the examples that we just gave is the difference between theory and experience. Safety professionals see a lot of hazards and a lot of injuries, and so we have a good understanding of those risks and consequences. But employees get complacent if they've never gotten hurt or don't know anyone who's gotten seriously injured on the job. The risk to them is theoretical. And then the longer that they engage in these risky behaviors without consequence, the more likely they are to underestimate that risk. This is why the most experienced workers take most of the risks. You may ask employees what they want most out of work each day. Do they want to go home safe? Do they want to get as much work done as possible, regardless of the risk? These questions are designed to get them thinking about their motivations for their behaviors and whether they should change those behaviors because, again, safety benefits them. Having said that, you might have some employees who did experience a tragedy, and if you can identify them, they can be powerful advocates for safety. We know that some of you got involved in safety after your own personal experiences, like a serious injury to a family member, or you saw something happen to a coworker. If you find employees with those types of experiences, encourage them to share their stories. Employees are also more likely to listen to a coworker compared to feedback from management. And the personal stories are always much more powerful and they are real. The ideal advocate is someone with a desire to help others and to share their message. Potential candidates can include someone who knows a friend, family member, coworker who is injured at work and wants to help others avoid that fate, or they may have their own personal story regarding safety, such as a personal injury or a really frightening near miss incident. It's a good reminder that you can't just throw your safety advocate out on the floor. They may need some training on how to remind coworkers to follow the rules. For instance, ask the advocate to share a story and use phrases like, "I'm worried that you'll get hurt. My friend lost 2 fingers reaching past a guard just like that." And you also want them to expand on their stories and give them some other real world examples. They'll essentially be telling coworkers to follow the rules, but they'll be doing this in a positive way by offering encouragement and not threatening to report violations, which is often the fear. Safety advocates lead from the middle by inspiring others, and this can also help prepare them for leadership or taking on more responsibilities later on. Among other things, they can explain why they do follow the rules. Understanding their motive for following the rules is as important as figuring out why people don't follow those same rules. In fact, ask anyone who always follows the rules to share their motivations. Ed?
All right. Now, safety advocates will need tools and resources to assist them in their efforts, and you do too. The Safety Management Suite has proven to be a good source for training material. So take advantage of our robust training resource library containing more than 3,500 ready-to-use training resources. They're exercises, PowerPoint presentations, 5-minute safety talks, a lot like that. And if you gain access to the Safety Management Suite, let us know your interest in the poll. We'll also send you a complimentary white paper that's titled Required General Industry OSHA Training at a Glance. Now, I want to remind everyone, you have an opportunity to send in your questions at any time. If you came in a little late, Barry had said we will have time for questions at the end of the event. So please do send in your questions at any moment or at any time throughout the presentation. And I do want to add a few thoughts of my own as we were talking here about risk. You're probably aware that risk is a function of probability and severity. Your employees might get complacent if the probability is low. And this is where things go wrong. You get a high severity injury like an amputation. So talk to them about that and remind them that risk is not just about the probability, a high probability. It's about a low probability with a high severity. The idea here, as we said before, is you want people to choose to participate, right? So how do you make them participate? It's hard to force them, but if you can help them find their own motive, their own reason that they want to participate, then it's so much better. They will make the choice to participate because they'll understand how it benefits them. All right, earlier I wanted to go into this. We talked about attitude problems, so let's revisit that a little bit. You may have to deal with employees or supervisors who have a negative attitude towards safety. Maybe you've had discussions again about the need for attitude adjustments. Here, you need to address the underlying reasons or motivations. Remember, the attitude is a manifestation of the behavior. It's the behavior. The underlying motive is what has to be fixed. So instead of thinking that you need to change attitudes, start thinking about changing the issues that are causing those attitudes. Now, employees may have any number of reasons for negative attitudes. Maybe they don't see the value of safety. Maybe they're just rebelling against authority. Some people do that. They push back, which is why your peer advocates can be so helpful. Maybe they did give into peer pressure from negative coworkers who told them we need to go faster, so we skip these steps. Whatever the motive is, you won't be able to change their attitude until you identify and address that motive. I'm going to kick it back to Holly for a bit.
So, how you approach someone depends on what their actual motive is, but a few approaches that you could use might be pointing out that safety protects employees, and they're the ones that pay the price for breaking the rules. So, safety literally hurts them the most. Productivity is always a priority, but productivity also decreases if someone gets hurt or has restrictions because of an injury. And then productivity drives profits, but the cost of injuries directly reduce profits. Again, they aren't doing themselves or your company any favors by taking shortcuts. So rather than focusing on the attitude or behavior, try to identify the reasons that they're actually not following the safety rules. If you can change their motives, then the attitude adjustment will also follow. If all else fails, try pointing out that safety is not meant to be a confrontation. You share a goal of making sure that they and everyone else gets home safe. So if employees or supervisors even are pushing back on you, you might ask what winning this confrontation looks like. Do they get more work done? Maybe so, but is that benefiting them or is that just benefiting the company? Do they gain more control over how to do their job, but increase their risk of injury? These are not really wins for the employee nor for the company. The company and employees might share a goal of maximizing productivity, but they should also share a goal of preventing injuries. These two goals absolutely can work hand in hand or side by side. So let's go through a couple of examples, starting with employees who resist change. You might have someone who says, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, which is something I've heard a lot in my career. So don't tell me how to do my job. For someone like that, what I found helpful is this approach. Request that they make a change, acknowledge their objections, and ask them for help. So first, instead of telling this person that they have to do this, request that they make the change, like saying, we would like you to try something new. Now, accepting change is not optional, but by making it a request instead of a demand, your employees are more likely to listen to the request because they feel like they have say. Second, if the employee objects, do not dismiss their objection. If you dismiss someone and what they hear is that their concerns don't matter, and then they're not going to listen to you. You have to listen to them, acknowledge the objection, and address it calmly. For example, if an employee says that this is going to take longer, you might say the company understands that it could take longer, but you'd like them to try it anyway, and that the employee will not be responsible for any extra time. So once you've addressed the objection, you can move on to the third step. Excuse me, my screen froze. The third step is explaining that you'd really appreciate the employee's help, evaluating the change because you want to leverage their many years of experience. This is playing to their ego just a little bit. Clarify that after trying this for a couple of weeks or a month or however long, that you would like their feedback on how it works and whether or not it could be improved. Finally, close out by asking, are you willing to help us evaluate this change? Most employees are more than willing to help because instead of telling them what to do, you've asked them to share their experience and their expertise. And even if they accept reluctantly, maybe thinking that this will never work, at least they're giving it a try. Depending on the feedback, you can always say, let's make your changes and try it for another month. And once you've got someone using a new process for a month or two or more, you've probably changed their habits, which is one of the big hurdles they have. Sometimes people just need to try something before they accept that it does work. Ed?
Yeah, and let me say that again. People sometimes need to experience something new before they accept it. I mean, otherwise the benefits, they're all theoretical and we're already comfortable. Hey, consistency is comfortable. We're in our comfort zone. So the reason we like this approach is that when you just demand that someone make a change, that's an authoritarian approach. Now, that might work with your kids sometimes, because I'm your father. That's why you do it this way. This is less effective with employees. And as Holly said, it's certainly less effective when the employee has been there a lot longer than you have. On the other hand, employees do want to feel valued and they want to feel appreciated. So they will accept a request for help, or most often will accept a request for help or a request for them to leverage their experience. So that's the non-confrontational approach. We're asking them to do something. We're acknowledging objections. We're not being dismissive. And we're saying, will you help us this? That can help encourage a change in behavior. And you can also point out, hey, this will help with your shared goals. And honestly, face-to-face discussions, I've seen things that when you ask someone for help over email, they're more likely to say no than when you ask someone for help face-to-face. So it's just human psychology. And especially now, if the new procedure works, the employee who's used it for weeks or months, they say, oh my gosh, this works. Well, that again, it completes the change in attitude. They come to accept it. So again, sometimes people need to try something to help them overcome their resistance. All right, now here's another example. Back at the beginning, we mentioned that some of them, from a survey we did, some of the most common excuses we got for not wearing PPE was employees just didn't want to wear it. The other responses are shown here, didn't think it was necessary. So, people could choose more than one, so the results are more than 100%. But to me, these first two responses, they're telling me that employees are choosing not to wear PPE. Well, we want to get them to think about the choice and the potential consequences that might help encourage the correct choice. Like I said, if there's a risk and they're choosing to accept the risk, well, they don't have the authority to make that choice. You require PPE not only because it prevents injuries, but because federal regulations require you to provide PPE and enforce its use. But again, you have the shared goal of preventing injuries. And I think this is where you sometimes might want to go to your employees and who always wear their PPE and say, why do you do this? I wear hearing protection when I mow the lawn. I don't want to suffer hearing loss. I understand it's permanent. This is people will share their motives. But I think some employees, whether subconsciously or consciously, they think they're smart enough to work without injury, or again, they think the probability is so low that the risk is worth not the discomfort of wearing PPE. But we need to encourage that correct choice, even when risk is low, but our probability is low, but severity is potentially high. And that kind of crosses over both attitude and accepting change. To encourage the right choice, you have a couple of different approaches. You can point out that an injury has consequences for the employee, their family, their coworkers, and the company. So when they're choosing to accept the risk, they're imposing the possible consequences on other people. And again, remind them, every worker who suffered a life-changing injury decided to accept the risk and later wished they hadn't. And speaking of probability, I have seen things that if something is a 1 in 10,000 odds, that doesn't mean much. But if you tell a story, an anecdote, even if it's a 1 in 200,000 odds, it has more impact. So those real stories work. Another option, acknowledge that the risk may be low or the probability may be low. And if they're careful, they can further reduce the risk. But again, describe the injuries that could occur, loss of an eye, severity, and ask them to consider if a life-changing injury is worth whatever benefit they get from not wearing PPE. And then, of course, from our survey, one of the common reasons employees don't wear PPE, they include things like it's uncomfortable, it doesn't fit right, it's hot, it decreases dexterity or vision. Well, for those things, there's usually something you can offer to mitigate or reduce those problems. I know that's an ongoing challenge, but we wanted to address it. All right. Now, I think some people, we're talking about control and being in control. Some people refuse to wear PPE, frankly, just out of a desire for control. Again, they might think, hey, look, I'm a responsible adult. I don't do this at home. I don't get hurt. So I don't need someone telling me when to wear my PPE or what safety procedures to follow or whatever it might be. But again, we want to ask them to think about the consequences of injuries, not just the hypothetical, but to themselves, to their quality of life, to their families, You like golf, you got a back or shoulder injury, you might never play golf again, that kind of thing. So earlier we talked about, writing a letter or putting up a family photo. This is why you stay safe. This helps remind them that their families don't want them getting hurt. Their coworkers don't want them getting hurt. The company doesn't want them getting hurt. You don't want them to pay that price. And then if possible, hey, give them something they can control, like the action items we mentioned earlier. Let them know they're in control of their own fate, their own safety, and give them control over something they care about. So earlier we talked about asking everyone, what do you want the most each day? What are your priorities? What do you want to happen? What don't you want to happen? And I think they might be surprised to find their priorities are probably very closely aligned with the company's goals and priorities. Back to Holly.
Thanks again, Ed. So let's talk about how you can hopefully avoid some of these challenges. You all know that preventing injuries is better than dealing with the aftermath. Well, preventing bad attitudes is also better than trying to correct them. So getting new hires on board is a really good start. However, your efforts could be undone if coworkers or even supervisors don't appropriately support safety. New hires could easily adopt a negative attitude. So too often, experienced workers and some of those pesky supervisors view safety as annoying. They're annoying rules that just make the job more difficult. If possible, supervisors should meet with new hires after a few weeks, asking if they are getting the appropriate support or if the new hire is encouraged to take shortcuts. Point out that this person doesn't need to give any names, but you are asking them just to be honest. The answers could help determine if a department or area needs more work on developing a positive safety culture. Related to that, employers often assign a mentor for new hires. Choose your mentors carefully and consider more than just their experience on the job. In fact, some of your most experienced workers might make the worst mentors because they take unnecessary shortcuts. Your long-term employees do have a lot of job knowledge, but might have poor safety records. They might be overconfident and lax about safety, or they might have developed those shortcuts to increase productivity, or they might even undermine supervisors who just don't know how to get things done. When looking for mentors, consider factors like patience, participation in safety meetings, and whether that person has an active role in reporting or correcting hazards. You want your new hires to learn the right way to do the job, not the fastest way. So find a mentor who doesn't encourage them to skip over safety. Ed?
Oh, and one thought I had on this, and again, I wanted to remind everyone to send in your questions. If you had ideas too, like the photos the person had bring in or writing a letter to the family, if you've had something, you can send that in too. And if it's a good idea, we'll share that with the group too. Another one I heard with this is when you're training a new person, if they're training shortcuts, was to ask, so if you were training your child to do this job, would you have them skip those steps or would you have them do it this way? That can make people think a little bit too. So just throwing that out. All right, we're changing gears a little bit now. We've been talking about employee support. We want to talk about management support. All levels of management should be supporting safety. Now, if a supervisor isn't supporting, that attitude is going to affect workers. And worse, if upper management doesn't address the supervisor's refusal to follow safety, then they're implicitly approving that refusal. So if you need to gain support from upper management, one option is to point out that a supervisor's refusal to enforce safety has absolutely no consequences. Well, at least not for the supervisor. I mean, sure, the employees face consequences when they get injured. They might have permanent life-altering injuries. And of course, the company faces consequences when people get hurt. There's OSHA inspections and workers' compensation costs, decreased morale and higher turnover. But what is the supervisor facing? If enforcing safety is part of a supervisor's job, and it should be, then refusing or failing to do it should have consequences. Maybe it's on their performance review. At the very least, they need to understand that they aren't doing their employees or their company any favors by encouraging shortcuts or skipping safety. Sooner or later, there's going to be a serious injury that might have been prevented if the supervisor had been more diligent. So again, if the employees are facing consequences, they pay the price. The company's paying a price or a cost. I think supervisors, if you can tell upper management, maybe supervisors should be paying some kind of cost here as well. Now, I understand that managers and supervisors, they don't always support every policy. They have to enforce them, but and employees don't support every company rule either, but hopefully they're following them most of the time. The challenge is that supervisors need to and want to build a cooperative relationship with their teams. But unfortunately, some supervisors kind of bond with their team by sharing frustrations. Now, even if a supervisor does not support a rule, they should never criticize it. They should instead know some of the benefits and be able to speak to those benefits. If supervisors are sharing their frustrations about a rule, employees are going to assume they're not going to enforce it. And that is going to create some very awkward situations when discipline does have to be imposed. So with questions like, well, you told me this rule was pointless, so now why am I being written up for not following it? Supervisors don't want that kind of confrontation either. So this means if workers object to a change, we kind of mentioned this earlier, supervisors need to acknowledge those objections and address them. Don't dismiss them. But again, supervisors should be able to describe some benefits or expected outcomes that are going to positively impact employees, or at least contribute to the shared goal of keeping them from getting hurt. Now, supervisors can empathize with employees a bit and yet still support the policy or change. They might say, hey, this is new to me also, but we need to make it work. And remember, again, people often need to experience something new before they accept it. Now, a supervisor may have to impose discipline for violations, but they can avoid that if they get employee cooperation. So they can ask for this support. They can say, look, my job as a supervisor is supporting company policies and enforcing them. That's not optional. It's my job. Your job as an employee is following company policies. That's not optional. We all have a goal of getting through this safe. And so why would we fight about this? Neither of us wants confrontations. All of us want to stay safe. So we can work together here. Now, even if a supervisor made the mistake of sharing frustrations in the past, they can still ask employees for help. They might admit that they made a mistake, but again, they can acknowledge objections to show that they value employee opinions and input, but explain, I need your cooperation so that we can avoid a confrontation that neither of us wants. All right, back to Holly.
Thanks again, Ed. So when employees do break or violate your safety rules, they might need reminders or even refresher training, or sometimes up through discipline. For a first or second violation, try to identify any barriers. So they're not wearing their safety glasses. Are they uncomfortable? Or did they not receive training on how to wear them and when? But when employees just ignore the rules, and discipline or termination may be necessary. So before delivering a reminder about safety rules, consider two things. First, consider how you're going to deliver that message. This affects whether the employee understands the reason for the rule or whether the employee just resents your feedback. There's a big difference between reminding them to stay safe and then simply yelling at them for breaking the rules. Highlighting the shared goal of injury prevention helps employees view safety as a benefit to them. This affects whether they change habits to protect themselves or if they're just following the rules so they don't get fired. Second, consider the impact of your conversation on other employees. The person given the reminder is going to talk to their coworkers about it. So when the story gets around, will other workers feel good that the company is concerned about keeping everyone safe? Or are they going to feel stressed or anxious about getting yelled at? And what impact could that have on whether or not they report future issues or other safety concerns? The consequences of delivering safety reminders go beyond the people directly involved. A supervisor creates a long-term impression that can influence the attitude of many employees. It is uncomfortable to deliver reminders, but supervisors should remind themselves that the purpose of this uncomfortable situation is to protect workers, not to assign blame. If discipline is necessary, it should be clear that the employee failed to improve after repeated opportunities, and that discipline was the final effort to protect that worker and his coworkers from injury. Some companies are reluctant to discipline or fire employees for safety violations, but using positive reinforcement can make your company a better place to work. To encourage safety, determine the reasons that workers ignore the rules and then develop an approach to counter them. Here are a couple of examples. Suppose the problem is workers don't recognize or understand why the procedures are necessary. You start with explaining the hazards and the potential injuries that could happen, as well as how the procedures themselves help protect them. Then have them feel heard and ask for their input on any alternatives. By making employees part of the solution, it shows that you value them and their input. It helps increase their buy-in and helps them understand why we're doing things the way that we're doing them. This is kind of like getting them involved in your hazard evaluations, like we mentioned earlier. Another problem is they skip safety to save time, and we talked about that a little earlier. So is the time saved worth the actual risk? Supervisors tend to focus on rewarding top performers and correcting the bottom performers. So everyone in between may be overlooked. To get more return on your safety efforts, increase your focus on the average workers who make up the majority of your workforce. Many surveys have found that most employees would stay in a job where they feel valued and appreciated, rather than taking a job that pays more but doesn't make them feel valued. People want to make a difference and feel like they're a part of something and that they're cared about. If your average employees aren't getting much attention, increase efforts to recognize their contributions and help them feel appreciated. This might include encouraging them to identify and report hazards. This is getting them more involved, giving them to-do items, or getting them involved in safety committees and asking for feedback. And then showing appreciation for staying safe and doing the job correctly. Consistently following the rules is absolutely worthy of praise. With that, Ed?
All right. So finally, if you're working with upper management, they hopefully know that injuries cost a lot of money. There's medical bills, there's workers' compensation, there's risk of an OSHA inspection, which takes time and can result in fines. But I understand prevention isn't cheap either. And resources, time and money, they're always limited. So you might need to show the benefits to get approval for something like a new engineering control. And frankly, the more complicated it is, the more it costs. But even if you do show a positive return, changes might not get approved right away due to initial costs. But again, remember that while the company pays the costs, the employees pay the price. So when hazards have the potential to literally change their lives, we're talking hearing loss, amputations, back injuries that require surgery, loss of an eye, those are life-changing events. Those kinds of injuries, you can put a dollar value on them a little bit, but realistically, they're beyond your ability to put a price on that. So when you're making the case to eliminate a hazard that requires a financial investment, maybe point out there's a price that employees pay here that it really can't be assigned a dollar value. All right, we're going to wrap up with some overall themes, and then we're going to take your questions. So please keep sending them in. Now, first, for our theme, you probably know that injuries result from an unsafe condition, an unsafe behavior, or more commonly, both. Well, employers should not blame employees for injuries, even if they violated a safety rule. There's usually something more the employer could have done. I mean, employers have an obligation to correct unsafe conditions, which we think about, but even OSHA says they also have to correct unsafe behaviors. That's what training, discipline, encouragement is all about. Ideally, your employees choose to work safely, but first they have to recognize the value of safety and how it benefits them. And the good news is you can get them more involved. We mentioned that some employees have a desire for control. Well, rather than taking control by ignoring rules, help them take control by improving their working conditions. We actually had one person who told us that when employees report a near miss, this is their opportunity to tell the company what to do. Hey, there's a hazard over here. You guys need to fix it. And if keeping your workers safe is your goals and avoiding injuries is their goal, then you should be working together to find and eliminate those hazards. All right, so we're going to take your questions shortly. Again, send them in now. And Holly and I would take another moment to thank our event sponsor, which is JJ Keller Safety Management Suite. We're going to open up a poll here to give you complimentary access. All of our most popular safety management tools. There's written safety plan templates, customizable training programs. There's self-audit, self-inspection checklists. We have federal regulations. We have comparisons between state and federal, and much, much more. So again, use the poll on your screen to let us know your interests. And as a thank you, we will email you our white paper, OSHA 101. This gives employers a general idea of what may be required from OSHA for all kinds of businesses. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. I want to turn it back over to Barry to start going through some of our questions.
Well, thank you so much, Ed, and thank you, Holly, for sharing your knowledge with us today. Before we start the Q&A, I want to let everyone know about the evaluation survey that we're asking you to complete. This survey will open in a different screen after the webinar. Your input is really important to us because it does help us to improve our future webcasts. Now, let's get to some of those questions. The first one is a bit of feedback. Ed, you asked for some folks to share some ideas, and one that we received said, maybe ask a supervisor what they think about the organization's current safety record. Their insight validates their input and also indicates their level of participation and understanding. Any thoughts on that?
You know, I have the first thought I had on this was I love the idea that by asking the supervisor what they think, you're soliciting input from them. And again, like they said, their feedback, do they know what's going on? Do they understand the company's safety record? Do they know their department safety record? I'm going to let Holly speak to this a little bit too, but you know, when we talked about giving employees to do items rather than do nots, supervisors need to do items also. If you want them to be part of safety, you need to tell them what they want to do. Give them step by step, make it as detailed as possible. Give them those to do items. Holly, what did you want to say?
So I do love that idea because it's kind of checks and balances to really understand what somebody understands. So this isn't just applicable for supervisors, but when you're out on the floor talking to employees, you want to find out what they're thinking. Why, see if there's any misunderstandings of why they think this is silly, or, like, wow, we could really make this better. So it's a good opportunity to see how things are actually working at the shop floor level. So I love this idea.
Great. Ed, I wanted to ask you, what can we do if a supervisor violates safety, but upper management won't address it?
Oh, I know that's a challenge. If supervisors are, encouraging shortcuts, I've talked to safety managers that you fire the supervisor, or if it happens once, maybe you give them a warning, but for the same thing. But if upper management won't address it, I know that's a challenge. The best you can do is try to work with upper management and say, look, this is the potential consequences. Again, unlike, I think employees get complacent because they don't understand that probability and severity index. Upper management does. I'm betting all of you, or most of you, have done, say, active shooter training. The probability is very low, but the severity is high. And so when we talk about that, if a supervisor is taking shortcuts with forklift safety or anything like that, very serious injuries can result. So the potential severity of something happening should mean, even if the probability is low, the risk is high, and it has to be addressed. Holly, any thoughts on that?
So it's making sure that they're connecting the dots. And one of the things that we didn't go much into with this is, especially for supervisors, is a lot of times we hire supervisors from the shop floor and we don't give them the training and support that they need to actually become effective in implementing some of these safety rules. And so part of this goes back to, we need to make sure we're supporting our supervisors by providing them the appropriate training, as well as having them understand the consequences of not following through.
Great, thank you for that. Holly, I wanted to ask a question about safety messaging came in. How basic can or should you make the messaging when you're simplifying a safety message to communicate with your workforce?
So it depends on your workforce. I've worked in areas where there was a lot of non-native employees. We've had Vietnamese and Spanish speaking, and you have to simplify it enough for them to understand. And you do need to provide training in people's native language if they don't speak much English. But the point is you can simplify it enough for them to understand it, and then you build on the simple message of, we don't violate lockout. You don't take the lock off. Why don't you take the lock off? And then you kind of build in that direction. Ed, do you have anything on that?
I think you've got it pretty well there.
Okay.
Great. Another suggestion came in from one of our listeners today who says, I ask employees what safety means to them. Then we share that in huddles and in our newsletter. Any thoughts about that?
That's a great one. I've talked to safety pros who say one of the challenges is just to get people talking about safety with each other. Bringing in the photos was a great way to do that. And this is a thing, if you can get people to say, write a paragraph. I talked to another safety manager. We had everybody write a paragraph, what safety means to you, or had their kids write a paragraph, or, and they posted them up on the message board. So these don't have to be expensive, but you want people talking about it. So much you do about incentive programs. I know employers do incentive programs to encourage greater safety, and it works to an extent because it gets people talking about safety, but whether you give a gift card or have a pizza party or whatever, it kind of gets forgotten. This, what safety means to you, I love because it gets people talking about it potentially every single day. We had I had one safety person who said, I've told my people, especially new hires, say, all right, our industry has an injury rate of 3 in 100. So I need 3 volunteers who are going to get hurt this year and 3 more who are going to get hurt next year. Or do we want to try and not have that happen? So, just kind of making it real there, it helps out a little bit.
Interesting take. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a good way to put it in perspective. Again, the probability, 3 in 100, big deal. All right. Well, who's volunteering for that?
Yeah.
Nobody does.
Great. Holly, next one I have for you is that came in. Any suggestions on getting union leaders on board with having union safety mentors?
So in the course of our discussion today, we've talked about a lot of working with supervisors and with upper management. The same rules and situations apply to your unions, right? Unions are there to protect the employees. And so a lot of times they have additional requirements beyond what the OSHA regulations are, depending on the industry. And so those conversations with your union leaders are trying to find that common ground of, look, we're looking to protect our employees. We want to protect your guys, our guys. And so what can we do? Who do you have that would be interested in taking more of a role in this? Or I've got these people that would be willing to help your guys. And you have to find that common ground to work with them and build together, because if one's telling the other one what to do, we all stick our feet in the mud and say, I'm not doing that. So you've got to find that common ground and help them understand.
Great, thanks. And thank you to Theodore for his comment. Remind folks that unions came into being on the premise of protecting the workers from injury. Thought that was an interesting comment. Thank you, Theodore, for that. Looks like we have time for one more question today, and this is for you both. A question that I wrote down during the presentation. If a new process works, how can you share with other workers that this experienced worker was a driver of that change, the experienced worker that you asked for help?
Oh, how do we show it? Yeah, I love that you got input. And like we said, if you get their input and their participation, you're more likely to get their support. And that's great. Do you bring that into new workers? Yeah, I could see, I'm going to give Holly a moment here. I know we're out of time, but I love the idea of telling people we get input from people. You are all involved in this. I love that.
Yeah, maybe recognizing the person, the experienced worker who helped you with that new process.
So I lean away from saying who it is, but
Okay.
speak to, just because you don't know what that person's relationship is with the rest of the folks. But the key thing is saying, look, like we touched base with a couple of employees, we got their input. This is from the shop level of how it really works. That's not just us telling you what to do.
Great idea. Thank you. Well, folks, unfortunately, we've run out of time today. We thank you all for attending today's presentation, and we would appreciate you taking a little bit of your time to share your feedback via our survey. A special thank you goes out to our terrific presenters, Ed Zaleski and Holly Pups, and everyone from our sponsor over at JJ Keller. This ends today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. Take care, everyone, and have a safe day.